Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. So, IGN uploaded a video recently titled There's Only Ever Been One James Bond, a 007 Nerd's Chronology, and several people were recommending this video to me on my various social media pages, and I think a large part of why it was being recommended to me so much was because I'm quite adamant when it comes to talking about James Bond chronology, and my kind of stance on the whole subject is just to kind of not think about it too much. I've made a couple of videos about the James Bond codename theory and how the codename theory is a load of nonsense that does not hold up, and basically there are arguments for such theories and against such theories, but neither really tend to hold up other than the general concept that James Bond is just one man. And yes, don't get too hung up on the fact that Bond is like 35 in 1962 and 50 years old in 2002. It doesn't matter. It's all just one character. It doesn't work on a linear timeline. Don't try to make it work. To try to instill a kind of Marvel Cinematic Universe continuity on the Bond series is a futile endeavor. And so we have this video. So the video's description reads, with No Time to Die and Daniel Craig's final turn as James Bond on the horizon, the 007 franchise enters its 7th decade. From Sean Connery's first outing in Dr. No through Roger Moore's 7 entries in the franchise and Pierce Brosnan's hit-and-miss run from GoldenEye to Die Another Day, Her Majesty's top secret agent has seen several different M's and Q's and moneypennies over the years, but has James Bond been different over the years as well? No, he has not. The fan theory that James Bond 007 is a code name may be the easiest one to subscribe to. No, it isn't, not even close. But there's another shaken, not stirred way to watch the franchise, in chronological order, as though he's been the same guy this whole time. So here are all the fan theories, logic leaps, and general delusions you'll need to entertain to enjoy James Bond in The Spy with Her Majesty's Quantum Finger and get answers to your most obvious questions. How do you account for Judi Dench's Q being Judi Dench's Q? Yes, yes, that famous Judi Dench role of Q. I particularly enjoyed that bit in The World Is Not Enough where she sort of flailed around in that inflatable ski jacket for a while. Or Bernard Lee being there for Sean, Roger, and George Lazenby, or all the different people that have played Ernest Stavro Blofeld, or the fact that Bond got married and immediately widowed. What about an actor being recast in multiple roles like Charles Jump to the Left Grey? They mentioned Charles Grey in the item, I can't even speak. I'm just so bowled over by the mention of Charles Grey. Charles Jump to the Left Grey. This isn't about the best James Bond movies or the worst James Bond movies. It's just that 25 movies, 6 actors, and almost 60 years of the franchise leave plenty of work out to make sense of the character's chronology. Let us know what you think of the timeline in the comments. So obviously this is incredibly baiting to a massive Bond fan like myself, and probably a lot of you guys watching this video, because as I believe we've covered many times, the franchise does not work on a chronological timeline remotely. So I was kind of curious coming to this video to see how on earth they would try to make any sense of this at all. So with all that being said, let's jump in and see how IGN tries to make the James Bond series work on a chronological timeline. We'll see.
Bond. James Bond.
James Bond has an interesting relationship with fandom. Spanning nearly 60 years and dipping its toe into a 7th decade, the ultimate spy's legacy is largely incidental. If you're a Bond fan, it can depend on where you were born, which Bond was the first one you saw in theaters, which Bond was your dad's favorite, and who knows what else.
My dad's favorite was Die Another Day for the longest time. That did not influence my opinions of that film an awful lot.
The result is a filmography that's pretty fragmented, with 6 different actors traversing several different eras, so, depending on which Bond fan you ask, the question of how should I watch the Bond movies elicits very different answers. My personal favorite answer is, you should watch all the Bond movies in chronological order as if he were really one guy the whole time.
Right, yeah. If we're talking about chronological order as in from like Dr. No to Spectre, as if he's one guy, then yeah, that kind of makes sense. James Bond is one character from Sean Connery to Pierce Brosnan, and then the Daniel Craig era makes a very clear-cut reboot of the franchise, of the timeline, of the character. That sounds relatively sound, but I have a feeling that this is going to get more complicated.
Shaken, not stirred.
007 made his bones over the years through largely standalone adventures. Daniel Craig's Bond is the only one that's had a legitimately continuous story, save for the back-to-back appearances of Jaws and Roger Moore's Tenure. But what if you, like me...
Oh, just Jaws. That's the only thing that we're going to refer to as continuity between the previous installments, really. Not Tracy's grave or anything like that, or Blofeld for that matter.
Wanted to assume that all 24 movies and all 6 of the actors played the same guy start to finish. What viewing order could possibly accomplish that?
Okay, so sorry, I just had to pause because this viewing order is... I guess we'll go into it, actually, but I'm already seeing things that I'm like, what? Goldfinger before Dr. No?
Castings and side characters and villainous plot threads be kept coherent? I'm glad you asked, friend, because here follows all the fanfic, logic leaks, and general delusions you'll need to entertain to watch the entire Bond franchise in quote-unquote chronological order.
Oh, okay, so he wasn't talking about chronological as in the order that the films were made. He's talking about chronological in the order that they're going to put it in now? It's a bit confusing. Okay, but first Casino Royale, yeah, makes sense.
Casino Royale offers the only true origin story of Her Majesty's secret agent. So we have to start here. James Bond receives his 00 status from Judi Dench's M after a grainy black and white cold open. Then he celebrates by shooting up an embassy. Classic James. After a trip to the Bahamas and the most exciting night of poker ever, we get to the end of the film where, for the first time ever, he utters his signature line.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
And we hear the Bond theme, for the purposes of this chronology, for the first time ever. Quantum of Solace picks up something like 20 minutes after the end of Casino Royale. The enigmatic Mr. White is still in Bond's trunk, and the bitter aftertaste of his heartbreak at the hands of Vesper Lind is still lingering. Happily, a trip down to Bolivia to thwart Dominic Green's honestly ahead-of-its-time plot about controlling an entire country's water supply is just...
Okay, so yeah, we're starting this with just... Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace is the first two. Makes sense.
Ready to work alongside Judi Dench's M once more. But we can't go to Craig's next film because in Skyfall we get this.
You know the rules of the game. You've been playing it long enough.
Which doesn't make that much sense because he just became
Okay,
007 like 3 weeks ago.
So they're kind of talking about this as if, like, the theory that I used to subscribe to, partly thanks to the 007 Legends video game, which presented Bond having flashbacks to previous adventures that the other Bonds that we saw, so Daniel Craig's Bond experienced on Her Majesty's Secret Service and License to Kill and Moonraker and Goldfinger. And I guess that this is kind of doing a similar sort of thing where you have Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace at the start, and then because he's an experienced agent in Skyfall, you have all the other films in the middle. At least I think that's what this is going to go for.
So when did he turn into an old dog?
Old dog, new tricks.
After Quantum of Solace, we start to see him turn into an old
okay,
dog
but we've
with the third
put
stop in our
Goldfinger
chronology,
at number
Goldfinger.
3.
Sean Connery is Bond at his coldest, and while Goldfinger doesn't set up all the things that would make Bond so famous, it does set up the all-important formula. An outlandish villain with an equally outlandish plot and a still more outlandish henchman.
Not sure about
But what about
this.
M? Here we find Bernard Lee as the man atop MI6 in Judi Dench's place. Let's say this is because Judi Dench's M has been called away to head up Station H for a time, and Bernard Lee is the new M in her stead, bringing with him the ever-faithful Ms. Moneypenny played by Lois Maxwell.
Oh, the only gold I know about is the kind you wear. You know, on the third finger of your left hand.
Okay, so that just proposed that Goldfinger, on a chronological timeline, would come after Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, with Bernard Lee's M replacing Judi Dench's M, and he would bring Moneypenny with him. I can't wait to see how we're going to make sense of the fact that Bond and Moneypenny meet for the first time in Skyfall, if that's the case. Next up, we've got 4 Dr. No, 5 From Russia with Love, 6 Thunderball. This obviously doesn't make any sense right off the bat because Dr. No is the film where Bond gets his signature Walther PPK weapon and he's using that in Goldfinger, so that scene at the start of Dr. No would make no sense if that came after Goldfinger. Anyway, on with the video.
In Bond's following 3 adventures, he begins to encounter what will become his chief rival, Ernst Stavro Blofeld.
Okay,
and
Blofeld,
the
yeah.
special executive for counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion, or Spectre, if you don't want to just revel in that acronym.
For your sake, I hope so.
In Dr. No, Bond thwarts a plan to thwart a space launch, an operation bankrolled by Spectre. From Russia with Love is a revenge plot devised by Spectre to get back at Bond himself. And a footnote here, these movies have to be screened back-to-back in this order specifically because of Bond's London-based love interest who appears in both films, who, in addition to having just the worst name, is actually responsible for Bond's catchphrase.
Trench.
What's wrong with Sylvia Trench? As a name.
Bond.
Is it really that bad a name?
But not in this chronology. James has said that loads of times before. Thunderball is next because it's another encounter with Spectre, but not with Blofeld. It's important that they've not met face to face yet, but by very slowly stopping the underwater theft of some nukes in the Bahamas, Bond is proving to be quite a thorn in his side. So much so that Blofeld, who prides himself on operating under the radar, decides to take a break from executing counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion in order to regroup and strike at him later. In reality, a long legal battle kept the franchise from being able to use Spectre or the character Ernst Stavro Blofeld until the most recent film,
You're a hard man to kill, Blofeld.
resulting in a long stretch of Bond films without his arch-rival. That same stretch of films, however, used most of the same supporting cast, so in this chronology, I'm happy to fanfiction my way into an excuse for Blofeld's absence by moving on to Roger Moore.
What? Sorry, what? I don't fully understand why up next is Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, and Moonraker. So they're putting this in as 1962, 1963, 1965? What on earth? I also can't wait to see how we're going to kind of address the whole Blofeld thing, that Bond and Blofeld essentially meet in Spectre and they grew up together, or at least spent some time together as adolescents. Okay, this video is kind of making a bit of a mangling of this. It's stretching. It's really, really stretching. And I also love that it had the sort of like, Sylvia Trench is not exactly a general audience, known character outside of like Bond fans, so it's quite cool that they talked about her a bit. But to kind of miss the whole Walther PPK thing is quite strange. We've also come to Moonraker. We have not had The Spy Who Loved Me yet. Obviously, Jaws is introduced in The Spy Who Loved Me and then is good at the end of Moonraker, so I'm looking forward to hearing how we get around this.
With Spectre laying low, Bond also has a chance to relax a little bit in a smoother, Roger Moore-flavored package. He's forced Spectre into hiding so much so that he legally can't even mention them. But he is allowed to go about the day-to-day business of taking cases as they come.
I'm sorry, I just had to stop after that explanation. Are we saying that Bond in the films had legal trouble with Spectre, or are we talking about that like outside the films? I don't really understand the point of that.
And after his Jamaican adventure in Live and Let Die, Bond must next take on Christopher Lee's excellent Francisco Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun.
He is indeed an excellent Bond villain.
And then go to space to stop Hugo Drax in Moonraker. The important thing here is that Bernard Lee is still M, Lois Maxwell is still Moneypenny, and Desmond Llewellyn is still Q. So that means we're dipping back into the Connery era while that cast is still holding down the fort at MI6.
I think it was just a typo on the years for the previous films. I guess they're not actually suggesting that those films took place in those times. It's just a little bit kind of jarring because I'm trying to wrap my head around what they're trying to get at here with this chronological order. Anyway, You Only Live Twice, number 10 apparently.
The high-profile nature of going to space and saving the world a few times plays havoc with the secret agent's ability to do their job. So, step 1 is to fake your own death.
Well, now that you're dead, perhaps some of your old friends will pay a little less attention to you for a while.
So the next movie up is You Only Live Twice. Bond finds his way to Japan where he pretends to take a wife while hiding out in a fishing village, then to a super iconic volcano lair and an enormous Austin Powers-inspiring showdown with his old pal Blofeld, who's decided he's done laying low.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
Even though James gets the better of him here, Blofeld comes right back in.
Okay, so we're
Diamonds
going
Are Forever.
from You Only Live Twice to Diamonds Are Forever because of Blofeld? I guess we're saving Majesties for a bit later on. Which makes sense, actually. I talked about this in my codename theory video, that because Bond directors have, the Bond continuity is so all over the place. Sometimes the films are, like Diamonds Are Forever, the very first sequence after the gun barrel sequence shows Bond in Asian-looking area, probably Japan, and that's where You Only Live Twice ended, so it makes sense, that you could fathom an explanation for why Diamonds Are Forever follows You Only Live Twice. In reality, they just kind of wanted to ignore that the George Lazenby film ever happened at the time. Don't read too much into it is probably the best advice I can give, so let's continue on with this video, reading too much into it.
If we're looking at the dynamic between Bond and Blofeld as a sort of Batman-Joker through line to this entire experiment, this movie begins to show the cracks in Blofeld's psyche. It's
We haven't talked about
frankly
the changing
a little
in
bananas.
appearance
He
in
creates doubles of himself
Blofeld,
and changes his appearance.
Double jeopardy, Mr. Bond.
Blofeld in the film is played by Charles Gray, who, in the
Jump to the
previous
left.
entry on this watch list, played a different character, contact of Bond's in Tokyo named Henderson. So this means that Blofeld made himself look like Bond's old ally, which is a dastardly move indeed. But in addition to Blofeld mimicking his old pals, Bond might be starting to run into a lady problem. Perhaps...
What on earth? Blofeld got plastic surgery to look like Bond's ally from You Only Live Twice? That's how we're explaining changing actors, really? Oh, wow. That is a stretch. That is a massive, massive stretch. Also, if that were even remotely the case, Bond would presumably, when he comes face to face with Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever, be like, Henderson? Like, what? But he's not. He's like Blofeld. He knows it's Blofeld. So we're just supposed to understand that it's a change in actor, and oh my goodness, this is, quite a stretch. How are we going to get to the Lois Maxwell, Caroline Bliss, Naomi Harris, Samantha Bond as Moneypenny thing? Jeez.
Perhaps getting fake married in You Only Live Twice has him eager to try out the real thing.
Majesty's Secret Service, okay.
Enter Contessa Teresa Tracy de Vincenzo, daughter of a European crime boss. A chance meeting on the beach leads to romance, which in turn accidentally leads to Blofeld. James finds himself face to face with Telly Savalas in a Swiss allergy institute while also surrounded by beautiful women from around the world. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is all Spectre and Blofeld all the time, with Bond discovering a plot to brainwash the women into spreading weaponized bacteria to their home countries, which fits with the crazy schemes Blofeld is resorting to these days. By the end of the movie, Bond has defeated Blofeld once again and has even married Tracy. As the newlyweds motor off to their honeymoon, Blofeld and his right-hand woman, Irma Bunt, murder Tracy in an Alpine drive-by, and George Lazenby's only outing as Bond sees the character's first real tragedy since Vesper's death in Venice.
So we just moved on to Fiore's Only now. There was no mention there about, like, why Blofeld's appearance changed again, why Blofeld, and, didn't recognize Bond when he turned up at the, at his Gloria. Not that these things bother me. I'm fine with changing actors. I'm fine with actors playing the same character, but they're just recast, whatever. But this video is making such an attempt to try to kind of interconnect all these different things, and for it just to gloss over that is a little bit rich. But okay, we're on to For Your Eyes Only now. I'm guessing we're moving on here because Bond drops Blofeld down a chimney stack, and I can't wait to see how when we get to Spectre they pull back from that.
So, here comes a hard cut to Tracy's grave, and a less whimsical Roger Moore than when we last saw him having sex in orbit. For Your Eyes Only was, in real life, a more grounded course correction from the bonkers Moonraker, which was itself a reaction to the success of Star Wars. But in this chronologically perfect watch order, the film is, in addition...
Sorry, they just said chronologically perfect watch order. I don't know if that's being sort of sarcastic or humorous, because we're finding many, many flaws in this.
To the graveside visit, a perfect follow-up to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Firstly, he immediately gets to kill Blofeld. Kind of. And if you're wondering why the film never says his name out loud or even shows his face, it's because the lawsuit keeping the franchise from actually using Blofeld was still in effect. So maybe in our version of events, this actually isn't Blofeld.
Okay, so they're suggesting that that actually isn't Blofeld in For Your Eyes Only? Okay.
But this dialed-back outing for Bond matches the mood of a recently widowed man. He's older, a little slower, and not quite the womanizer he's been to date.
I actually quite like that.
This is as close to mourning as we get with 007. This is also an M-less Bond movie, as Bernard Lee passed away before he could shoot his scenes for the film, and they opted to rewrite the movie instead of recasting in a hurry. Of course, in our chronology, we don't know that, so...
Okay, so next we're on to The Spy Who Loved Me. Obviously doesn't make sense, we've already seen Bond battling Jaws in this chronology.
The Spy Who Loved Me is the final Roger Moore film to feature both Bernard Lee as M, so in essence he's still in charge in spite of not appearing in the previous film, and a mention of his dead wife.
Many lady friends, but married only once. Wife killed.
All right, you've made your point.
But also, Bond seems to have more distance from Tracy's death, as The Spy Who Loved Me is pre-Moonraker peak Roger Moore charm, from the Union Jack parachute to the perfectly timed cork pop. There's also Zero Spectre and Blofeld, although apparently they tried initially to incorporate him as the villain, but yet another injunction forced them, in the real world, toward Carl Stromberg's oceanic-obsessed bad guy.
Now you will pay the penalty.
The film also briefly introduces an Admiral Hargraves, played by Robert Brown, who is clearly in line for a promotion.
Oh, okay. We're going down the Admiral Hargreaves actually is, promoted to M route, which I actually subscribe to and I quite like. Obviously, it's just a fan theory that Robert Brown is playing the same character in The Spy Who Loved Me as he is when he goes on to play M. I quite like it. It doesn't make or break the continuity of the film series, I don't think. It's just a kind of a nice little thing for fans. But anyway, next we're on to The Living Daylights and License to Kill.
But wrapping up The Spy Who Loved Me with yet another tryst with a spy has to have taken its toll on the man. So next we move into Timothy Dalton's run. The Living Daylights and License to Kill features a return to the colder side of Bond with just a dash of Roger Moore's empathy left over. Meanwhile, Desmond Llewellyn is still trusty old Q, but Robert Brown got that promotion and is the new M for these two films, who brings with him Caroline Bliss as his Moneypenny. By the way, I think this also indicates that Moneypenny is a code name just like M or Q. But, real-world note here, these films were also made in the 80s at the height of the AIDS crisis. Bond's sex life was very intentionally kept to an absolute minimum.
Nothing to do with anything.
It's also clear the world is changing, and the powers that be have decided to bring Judi Dench's M back from Station H to shepherd in the new era.
Okay, we've gone from The Living Daylights and License to Kill, where Moneypenny is a code name, apparently, so that's how we're getting around the recasting of Moneypenny. I find it really strange that this video is suggesting that it's, all the Bonds are the same guy, which they are, but then, despite different actors. I'm surprised it's not making that same case for, Moneypenny, or, even the Robert Brown Bernard Lee M, you could argue is supposed to be the same character. This video isn't going down that route, which is quite weird, but they're sort of contriving this reason for Judi Dench's M not to be M at the start, leave, and then we get a couple of different M's, and then she's back now for GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. We haven't had Octopussy yet, have we? Have we?
Pierce Brosnan's tenure as Bond runs the gamut from legit good with GoldenEye to tsunami surfing bad with Die Another Day, although fans of Bond's campier moments will say that film has actually aged quite well. But in terms of watching the franchise in chronological order as though he's one guy the whole time, they all occupy the same space. GoldenEye definitely comes first as it establishes a new order of business with Judi Dench's M, as well as Samantha Bond as Dame Judy's personal Moneypenny. It should also be pointed out that Desmond Llewellyn's Q makes his final appearance in The World Is Not Enough, passing the torch briefly to John Cleese, who, in spite of his best efforts, was never really going to work out.
Oh, poor John Cleese! Okay, now we're on to Skyfall.
Like I said 19 movies ago, it was always silly how Bond was a brand new 00 in the first two movies, then a grizzled vet old dog who can't learn new tricks in the third film. But watching it this way, oh boy does this put some miles on the guy. He's squared off with supervillains, saved the world countless times, been married, widowed, and mourned. No wonder he's playing drinking games with scorpions as part of his retirement plan. But the resurfacing of Javier Bardem's Silva to seek vengeance for M's now fairly recent transgressions in Station H coaxes Bond back to MI6, where he meets John Cleese's young replacement, Ben Whishaw's Q, who, after years of dealing with aged Desmond Llewellyn, comes as a bitter pill to swallow for our old dog James. The battle against Silva takes James all the way back to his ancestral home and ultimately leads to the death of Dench's M and her replacement, Ralph Fiennes. And oh look, all of a sudden Eve's name is Moneypenny.
Eve Moneypenny.
Cause seriously, it's a codename in this universe. But Bond is ready to get back to work, right?
Okay, I mean, yeah, you know what, it does make somewhat sense for Skyfall that Bond would have experienced many different missions in between that and Quantum of Solace, so yeah, that's all well and good. I think it's simpler just to subscribe to the 007 Legends theory that, you know, you have Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, all the other 20 films, and then Skyfall. Obviously, that doesn't work now that we're going to take Spectre into account, so let's see how they get around the fact that Blofeld's back and looks like Christoph Waltz.
And back to work he gets, but still taking orders from his old M. He dives into the resurgence of the shadowy group that he thought he took down way back in Quantum of Solace, but it's not just a revival of Quantum, but a revival of Spectre. And sitting at the head of the table is his dear old adopted brother, Franz Oberhauser. Now, say what you will about Spectre as a movie, but whether you liked it or not, there's a way to watch this movie that makes it better. According to the film, Franz, who hated James because their father loved him more despite being adopted, rose through the world of organized crime to create Spectre, all in the interest of ruining James's life, and he pulled the name Ernst Stavro Blofeld from his mother's side of the family. But the problem with that is, the name is meaningless to James. Star Trek Into Darkness made the same mistake with Khan. In this perfect chronology, however, Franz hates his adopted brother so much that he renames his criminal empire and even changes his own name to something that specifically digs deeper, more intimately into his brother's psyche, with the revelation that Bond had fallen into Blofeld's orbit as a child. The man that took him in as an orphan, Hans Oberhauser, was in fact married to the Blofelds. How crushing is that? But also, like Casino Royale's unique origin story,
Sorry, I might just need to rewatch that. What is that suggesting? So I think this is suggesting that Franz Oberhauser is not the same person that Donald Pleasance and Charles Gray and Telly Savalas was, but that guy took on the name Blofeld because he knew it would piss off Bond, but there is some kind of Blofeld family connection there. I'm very, very confused by this video. This is... Wow. This is really going to some length to, try to make this work, and it's just not working at all. But anyway, okay, now we're on to a couple of Roger Moore films that were left out. Let's see how these fit in.
Roger Moore's final two turns as 007 are, in all honesty, some of my favorites. The campiness is so much fun to revisit, in part because of the killer theme in A View to a Kill, but mostly because of how old Bond looks. Like, Roger Moore in his 50s old. So, what if, after driving off into retirement with Madeline Swan, Bond gets that itch again, to go out into the world and save it from those who would twirl their mustaches? The man has spent his entire life saving the world, only now to be asked to settle down. Sure, retirement was his idea, but expecting him to behave after the shit he's done and seen, it's even enough for him to go so mad for the old days, he imagines previous M's and Q's and moneypennies on his way out the door for what amounts to an unstable, flashback-riddled, almost 60-year-old former spy embarking on unsanctioned missions.
People call me ageist when I talk about how Roger Moore is too old in A View to a Kill. This is suggesting that he is hallucinating about his former MI6 co-workers because he's just old. So that's how they're getting around Lois Maxwell and Robert Brown being in these. Wow.
Old man Roger Moore, and if you want to, here's a way Connery's off-brand Never Say Never Again would fit in as well, doing all of this while he's got Madeline Swan waiting for him at home. What lies is he telling her? What business trips does he say he's going on? Well, at some point, that all catches up with him and Madeline bolts, leaving him alone in retirement in Jamaica with, according to the trailer for No Time to Die, a bad knee. And hopefully No Time to Die isn't just a big remake of Dr. No, because that might make me rethink this whole thing.
And then we come to the Casino Royale spoof, apparently.
Also, if you're interested, the 1967 psychedelic Nobody Behind the Wheel adaptation of Casino Royale would fit perfectly here at the end, with David Niven's retired James Bond being the continuation of the character, but honestly, you don't really have to watch that. But in the meantime, you've got half a century's worth of super spy adventure to watch with a very specific set of instructions to keep in mind at all times. So, let me know how crazy you think it is in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch. 50 years worth
Crazy
of spy
indeed. Huh. Interesting. Okay, that was, yeah, that was something else. I mean, I have seen a lot of forum posts and blog articles and videos trying to sort of make sense of the Bond chronology, trying to make it work on a linear timeline, and that was probably the craziest I've ever seen. I think it was done relatively tongue-in-cheek. I mean, it's a nice video, and the narration's quite kind of, you know, dryly comedic, and, you know, it's clear from, you know, some of the typos and stuff, that, yeah, this was perhaps not made by someone with a complete in-depth knowledge of the James Bond film series. So I think that's, I mean, this is where a lot of Bond trying to make sense of these things, it really does just fall apart. I mean, you see it in that video where it's like, you know, they go to the effort of sort of explaining why Blofeld looks the way he does in one film and then looks like Charles Jump to the Left Grey in another, and yet by the time we get towards the end of the thing and it's like, okay, well, how do we explain that Moneypenny is Lois Maxwell again after being, you know, Samantha Bond, Caroline Bliss and all this, and it's, oh, Bond's just old, he's just hallucinating. You know, it's, I know that these things are done, you know, relatively tongue-in-cheek, and obviously it is incredibly fanboy to get worked up about these kinds of things, and I do hope that I'm not giving the impression of being worked up by it, but, yeah, it's just funny seeing these kinds of things when all you really need to know is Sean Connery to Pierce Brosnan is one man, irrespective of time. It doesn't work on a linear timeline. Don't try to make it work on a linear timeline, and then Daniel Craig just kind of starts anew. Yes, there are inconsistencies. Yes, he has the Aston Martin DB5 in Skyfall with the gadgets that he had in Goldfinger, but just don't let it bother you. I'm just scrolling through the comments as well, and it's like, yeah, a lot of people are pointing out stuff, you know, the Jaws, yeah, people are pointing out that Connery through Brosnan is meant to be the same character, Craig's Bond is in its own continuity, problem solved. Oh, and then people respond. It's the comments that you get from people who are like, yes, but how do you explain that he's 35 in 1962 and 50 in 2002? How does that work? And it's like, it doesn't, so don't try to make it work. It doesn't make any sense. Just leave it alone. Stop getting Bond wrong. So there we go. I think take that video with a big old pinch of salt, and for God's sake, if you're watching this series for the first time ever, do not watch it in that chronology. I would highly recommend, if you are coming to the series for the first time, you know, go to the era that probably appeals to you the most. I don't think to get the most out of the Bond series, you really need to go Dr. No to Spectre. I think, you know, dip your toe in. If you're a big fan of 90s action films, start with Brosnan. If you are more of a 70s fan, movie fan, start with Roger Moore. You know, if you like more modern stuff, start with Craig. And if you get into it that way, then go back and kind of appreciate the other ones and maybe watch them in order. I don't really feel like, aside from the Craig ones, even the Connery ones that have Blofeld dipping in and out, I don't know if you necessarily need to watch them in chronological order to get the most out of it. I can watch any of those, like, 60s Blofeld movies in isolation and I appreciate them perfectly well, unlike Quantum of Solace, which I think very much only works not too long after you've watched Casino Royale. Anyway, that's my advice, but God, if you haven't seen any Bond films, what are you doing on this channel? That was really interesting, so thank you everyone who kind of recommended that I have a look at that. It was a well edited, like, you know, selection of clips and stuff, and some good interesting theories, but obviously it's certainly not a 007 Nerds chronology. I don't know what a true 007 Nerds chronology would look like, but who knows, maybe one day I'll try and make it work. and then I'll hate myself for the rest of my life. That is it for this time, Bond fans. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to stay up to date with other videos on this channel, then please do go below and click the subscribe button. And also please let me know your thoughts on this video of me talking about another video in the comments below. Also below are links to my various social medias, so my Facebook and my Twitter and my Patreon page for those of you who want to go one extra step in supporting this channel. Until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.